Welcome, welcome. Thanks for joining us today or watching the replay. We've been working on a lot of webinars to help our independent owners navigate a lot of what goes into being a landlord, specifically in the District of Columbia. I appreciate you joining us today. And my name is Conrad Bennett. I work with EJF Rentals, and our focus has been working with those small housing providers for decades. Being able to go through the process, presumably knowing how to navigate the expectations that most jurisdictions will implement. But today we're going to be focusing on what it looks like to be able to retain good quality tenants, secure new ones when that day comes, and with keeping the occupancy and reducing vacancy, you're going to be increasing your income over time. I got James Rice with me today. He's been working with me for nearly a decade, focused on leasing properties fast. So we're going to have a little piece of the conversation where we're going to talk about what it looks like to keep the tenant and then, of course, securing a new one. James leases about 100 units a year, involved in that aspect of it. And in his tenure with us, that's been over 1,000 in that time. So vacancy rates are well below the local and national averages. That's one of his main focuses, trying to be able to get the units when they do go vacant, reoccupied with a great quality tenant that's going to pay the rent and take care of the place. Two huge factors in what will contribute to you having a great experience as a landlord or not so great. Now, today we're going to handle a couple of different things. One of which is going to be about why vacancy reduction matters. Another is going to be about what efforts you can do to be proactive and getting ahead of the turnover. It's all about what you know. And ignorance is not bliss when it comes to property management. We'll expand upon that. Now, we're also going to want to talk about what our marketing efforts look like and how we can automate showings and attract quality tenants. And then, of course, once you do get those applications in, the efficiency matters. And we're going to talk about how we do that to ensure consistent cash flow. And we'll talk about a couple of case studies where we've gone through and experiences that we've navigated to help owners not only get out of their situation, but to improve upon it later. And at the end, we're going to leave a few minutes to help answer a couple of questions and answers. Now, I am going to ask a question or two along the way, so I do hope that you'll be helpful and provide some answers, just dropping them into the chat. We're going to be sharing out a meeting invitation so that if you have questions for me that you'd like to bring offline or talk about your specific situation, I am more than happy to have those consultations to see what we can do to help you or give you our guidance from our experiences. So we're going to start in with the aspect of considering that you already have a tenant in place, right? If a good tenant is good, paying the rent on time, taking care of the place, you think you're getting a reasonable rent, it's important to be able to retain them. And so when we're going through this process and overseeing the holistic aspect of managing a rental property, there's a lot of factors that come into the equation. But some of the major ones are going to be the idea of getting in and seeing what the property looks like. I said it before and I say it a bunch of times, but ignorance is not bliss when it comes to managing a property. You don't want to have surprises, thinking that everything is well and the tenant's taking care of it. And when they move out, there's going to be a ton of work that needs to get done. So periodically checking on the property is helpful. And that's something that you want to do out the duration and the timeline throughout the life cycle of the property. But at the same time, when we get into that renewal period, the last 120 days before the current lease terms are set to expire, or you've hit that annual renewal period on a month-to-month tenancy, you really want to make sure that you get your ducks in a row because it can go a couple of different directions. One of which is that they may want to stay. Another is that they're planning on going. We don't know necessarily what they have going on in their life. And so beginning those conversations about 3 or 4 months before the end of the lease is critical, just to be able to start planning and knowing which fork in the road you're going to need to pursue. So our team will reach out to you, reach out to the tenants early, just to start to gauge that renewal interest. We don't know what they're thinking, and obviously life changes regularly. And so we want to know what their initial intention is, but then also can reach out to an owner to see what their expectations are. And when you know what the two parties are expecting, then you can start working on those renewal initiatives to basically maintain the relationship with the good quality tenants. Now, hopefully, and the majority, I would say we are well over a 90% renewal rate with our clients and the residents. But of course, life happens and people move. Inevitably, they may not like the neighborhood they're in. They may not, they may be looking at a job offer in another city. But if the tenants do end up giving their notice to vacate, James, what are you doing as soon as you know that they're planning to move out to be able to be proactive on those next steps?
Awesome. Thanks, Conrad. And thank you all for attending this webinar. So generally speaking, we want the tenants to provide at least a 60 days notice to vacate just to get ahead of the process. So ultimately, what we look at is a couple of different factors. First and foremost, what does the condition of the property look like? As Conrad has alluded to, you want to take a look at the place multiple times during the tenancy, but if they do give notice, you want to do another inspection just to see what the condition of the place looks like. If the condition of the place looks good, the next factor is really the marketing materials. Do you have good professional photos? Do you have a virtual tour? Do you have everything that you need to get the place on the market and to start generating interest for prospective tenants? Those are really the two main factors. If the place isn't in good shape, can you work with the tenant to try to make it, more appealing to prospective tenants? And as mentioned in this webinar, pre-scheduling some work to get some of that stuff done prior to the tenants vacating.
Awesome. And I made a mention about watermarks because in
Mhm.
terms of this day and age and the constant conversations that are being had about scams, it is important to make sure
Yeah,
you're watermarking those photos to protect the public. So be making sure that you're doing that. We do it on everything. And another huge stat that we'd heard recently is that with good marketing material, upwards of 37% of potential applicants may be willing to apply sight unseen. Now, they
yep,
still may want to get in and see it, and then we're going to talk about that in a minute. But it's an alarming number as long as you have great marketing material. And so we use a really cool Matterport camera that takes pictures every 3 feet, gives that panoramic view, giving great descriptions, and knowing what work is going to get done so you can establish the appropriate timelines. So we're coming to the tail end of the month. If a tenant's moving out on the last day of the month and you need a week, maybe two, depending on what work is expected, painting, cleaning are pretty standard expectations. You will want to leave those till the tenant has vacated, but you don't want to make the unit available before you know it can be done, right? So using great
absolutely.
quality contractors that you can work with. So James, tell us about what tenants are looking about in advance for housing these days. What are you typically seeing?
Yeah, I mean it's a good question. So, I've been doing this for since about 2014, and things have shifted quite a bit, even really since COVID, about 2020. And I don't know if it's just new generation, and what is it, Generation Z? I forget. I'm getting too old. But a lot of people are looking for pretty quick turnarounds for move-ins. I think a lot of people, especially, younger professionals, I mean, they're looking to move in within 2 or 3 weeks, and they're kind of dragging their feet to, find housing until the last, couple of weeks before they really need something. And that's been a pretty drastic change from when I first started in 2014, where, people were getting ahead of it, looking 60, 90 days out. So, even if the notice is given 2 months in advance, you don't need to necessarily rush to get it on the market, but you still, you want to put it in there between that 30 to 60 day period, at least start generating interest coming soon. But ultimately, a lot of people are looking for pretty quick turnarounds for move-ins.
Right. And you have to plan. So, in
Yeah.
order to know what to expect and what kind of timelines you're working on, this is the notice opportunity to start putting that plan together. Whether or not
Hmm.
you do market sooner or later, or you know what work is needed to get done, these are the big variables in a large equation that you can start to eliminate as soon as you know which directions the tenants may go. So, Don't let that time pass by. Take advantage of it and start planning next steps.
Yep.
And we also know that cleaning, some additional repairs, those things will have to be done after they leave. You can't necessarily do it all while they're still living there. You'll likely want to leave painting, cleaning, etc., until after they're out. And you've done that final inspection, have keys possession, and are able to get it set up. But having it all set up in advance is really critical to be able to make sure that that timeline and the vacancy period is reduced. So James, why don't you tell us about targeting those right audiences and those efforts on your side?
Yeah, so ultimately exposure is key when trying to find a residence. And ultimately you want to try to cast a large net and try to find as many people as possible, right? But I've been tracking this number for about 18 months or so, and about 93% of all of our applicants and tenants come from the Zillow network. Zillow, Trulia, Hot Pads fall under that the Zillow network. So, really, it's not just Zillow, but you wanna make sure you are using the proper websites to find the best quality candidates. And in my opinion, and based on the stats that I've been tracking, Zillow has really been our number one source of prospective tenants.
Yeah, and of course we have a Zillow account, which is
Yes.
paid. So how does that boost of visibility help us out?
Yeah, so I mean, I can't go into everything Zillow has to offer, but I mean, they are definitely a pay for play now. It's not free like it used to be. And they have different tiers. So depending on what you're paying for can boost those ads to the top of, a search engine for a resident. So you want to make sure you're utilizing the software correctly in order to get your listings out there and on the first page of everybody's mind, and not on the third or fourth page where nobody's seeing it, right? So, and then with that, you know we have showing softwares where we can track people's interest in certain types of places, right? Like a one bedroom in Columbia Heights, but let's just say that one didn't fit their needs. When we go live with another place that's similar to that, they're automatically going to get notified of that place coming on the market. So it's retargeting that audience that we already have, that we've gotten from Zillow, we've gotten from Trulia, we've gotten from wherever else, and utilizing that showing software to try and be as proficient as we can with finding prospective tenants for the next place.
Which is great to be able to re-engage those that have already expressed interest. And obviously, with our portfolio and the properties that we're managing, it is really going to be able to expand that net and be
Mhm.
able to bring back those that might not have panned out. There's a lot of great applicants out there. You don't want to lose them. So making sure that you're tracking that interest is critical, and maintaining that list, right?
Absolutely.
So if a person does say, "Hey, I want to see this,"
Yeah.
how impactful have these changes been over the last couple of years about showings?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the whole idea is to get as many people into the property as quickly as possible, right? So, you want to utilize any sort of avenue to get people in. So, it's either through a self guide, or excuse me, it's through, an agent stopping by to take a look at the place with the prospective tenant. It's through the virtual tour options. I think Conrad alluded to it a little bit earlier, but using that 3D Matterport camera to, have people see the property virtually online, or through a self-guided tour option. There's a way where you can get somebody in there in a safe way, and allow them to take a look at the place even without an agent showing up there. So the whole idea is to get as many people in as possible, and get an application in as quickly as possible to cut down on vacancy.
And speed matters, right? So if a
Yes.
person reached out right now and wanted to see it this afternoon, you really want to be able to make sure that you can facilitate as best you can as possible. If you're going to
Yep.
say, you know what, no problem, I can get over there, but not until Saturday. They might have found another property by Saturday.
Exactly.
And then not
Yep.
only are you going to be potentially wasting your time going over there for a potential no-show, of course, I hope you confirm those showing appointments before you drive someplace, but you don't want to miss out on that opportunity because they are statistic came out a long time ago, and I'm sure it still holds true to form. But with the internet being as vast as it is, people will look online all day and all night, narrow their search down to presumably their top five, probably only see three, and then pick one. And so if you're not able to accommodate that, you're going to be losing out on a great pool of potential applicants that have already determined that your property is one of their favorites that they've seen. And of course, you have
100%.
much greater success when you have a tenant that wants to be in that property. And so you want to be able to facilitate it. And there are some showing softwares out there that can help automate that. We utilize one, also allows for great reporting functionality so that if
Hmm.
we are missing or we're not getting the interest that we are hoping for, it allows for our team to give weekly updates. So when we know that the place looks good, and we know that it's showing well, and we know that people are seeing those ads, all that's left is the pricing. So James, why don't you expand upon that a little bit and what the differential is about trying too high, or if you do have a property that's not getting a ton of interest, how do you approach that on a week by week basis once the lot property's on the market?
Well, yeah, I mean, hopefully I can convince the owner to adhere to what I think the property will rent for. But sometimes, you deal with some challenging owners and they think one way. And at the end of the day, it's their property and if they want to try for that price, so be it. But ultimately, it doesn't do anybody any good if the property sits vacant, right? So, the way I try to tackle it is, just say, if we're not getting a lot of showings, if the feedback says the price is too high, I mean, it's just a matter of providing that feedback to the owner and saying, look, this is what we need to do to get this place rented. So, educating owners on the front end about pricing is definitely, what you want to do. But if they still want to try for that pricing, the higher pricing after the place is on the market, then providing that feedback and letting them know, hey, this is what I'm getting or not getting, and this is what we need to do to get it done. And just making sure the owner's updated. That's what I would do.
Right. And a lot of what research many owners will have at their disposal is going to be numbers provided by larger buildings that have a different approach to how we're doing it. Independent investors and housing providers that we work with on a regular basis are the condo, the co-op, the single family home predominantly, and we need to make sure that we're looking at those numbers. And so our involvement is able to give better guidance than you may occasionally find online. And you need to be mindful of those potential differentials. So if a person applies, we want to lock them in, but we want to make sure this is our vetting process. Getting a good quality tenant in there is critical. And if they are marginal or don't meet our requirements, it's probably better, especially in the district and surrounding jurisdictions, to potentially pass and wait for a better applicant to come along. And we want screening is critical and timely. It has to be timely. But we give all of this information in advance to weed out those that may not necessarily meet those expectations. So James, why don't you expand upon what we're looking for in a great quality tenant?
Yeah. So, obviously, in DC, you can only look at certain things in order to vet a tenant, right? So, what we look at is listed here, but ultimately, we look at the income, we look at the credit, which should, financial background is another fancy word for credit. We look at past landlord history and criminal history. So ultimately, for our income, they need to make at least three and a half times the monthly rent and gross annual income. For credit or financial background, DC does not permit you to have like a minimum FICO score requirement, and you can't reject someone based off of a FICO score. What you can either accept or reject them based off of is what's in the credit. So if there's delinquencies, if there's past due amounts, if there's collection items, that's where you can potentially reject someone based off of that information in there. We also reach out to their current landlord or the last two or three. Ultimately, we're trying to get as many landlord references as possible. But with younger professionals right out of college or living at their parents' house, they may only have one landlord reference. So we want to make sure we get that to verify that they were good tenants and they paid rent on time and they took care of the place and they didn't have a pet living there like that they weren't supposed to. And then finally, criminal history. So DC passed a law back in 2017 where you have to run someone's criminal background after a conditional approval. So assuming the resident that you're screening hasn't done anything horribly malicious in the last 7 years, and I'm not going to go through every single one where you can reject them off of, but assuming they haven't done anything malicious within the last 7 years, then they will meet the criminal background screening requirements that were set forth by DC. So, yeah, go ahead, Conrad.
Yeah, so, and of course, this sounds like a lot, right? For
Yeah,
many people that might be doing this on their own, it sounds like a lot. But our process is in place to be able to reduce this decision process to same day, possibly next day, depending on what information may be needed. We're able to send application links to the tenant directly after an inspection has been completed or a showing's been completed, and we're being able to navigate all of that aspect timely, right? Collecting the
yep,
information that's needed, and then being able to make a decision same day, next day with the leases out for potential signature within that 24 to 48 hours. Because again, if this is their favorite place, you want to lock them in. Because if they're moving timely, then that's a good indicator of their tenancy as well. And so selecting those tenants that will stay. When you're doing background checks and looking at their history, not only credit, but how long they've lived there. There are a lot of stable renters out there that have been in their locations for 5, 10, 15 years. And that's something to be mindful of as well as assessing their fit for the property, for the neighborhood, and how they've gone about those renewals in the past, right? So, next, so as far as it goes, we've had a couple of case studies and a handful of scenarios that we're very mindful of that always stick around. So, James, why don't you tell me about an owner that had started too high on their marketing and lost time because of the vacancy?
yeah, and I think I kind of touched on this a little bit already, but there's one occasion where I had an owner that tried to get a rent of around $4,500 a month, sat on the market for 6 weeks. We reduced it down to the price that I thought it was going to rent for, and then it rented within a few days. So if we were already at that rental price 6 weeks ago, he would have already he or she would have already generated that rental income. So it's again, these things, people can get emotional about them, right, Conrad? I mean, we've seen it all in the
Yep.
last 10, 11 years or so. But really adhering to a professional that understands the market will really help cut down on vacancy for your property.
And getting that good quality tenant in there goes a long way. I mean, I remember way back early in my career that there was an owner that was grasping at anybody to be able to secure a tenant. In the end, I'll never forget. He said, "Are they breathing?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "They're going to take them." Lo and behold, 3 months later, we're going through an eviction process for non-payment, and
Mm,
when we did get it back, the property was trashed. And so, not only did the all of those efforts more than be negated. It extended the situation and certainly that unfavorable experience in that landlord's history. So it will preclude them from wanting to do it again. At least making putting anybody into a property. You want to be mindful. And of course, after we were able to not only get places fixed up and back online faster, we are able to start showing them in advance with the tenants' cooperation, making sure that the properties are in good order. Those self showings that we're able to implement has been tremendously helpful, especially with current tenants' assistance. And then, of course, making sure that we're able to do that screening and have that set standard because rising tides lift all ships. When we elevate our game, the applicants that we're going to seek and attract are going to follow that. So you really want to make sure that we're able to try to reduce that vacancy period. We have in many cases to as little as 5 days. We're able to secure those good quality tenants that are going to stay long term, and the longer they stay, the more you'll make, which is going to work on that annual cash flow and eliminating lost rent. And so, if you're able to retain a tenant for the next 3, 5 years, obviously that's going to have a significant impact over the potential of lost income tied to a tenant that stays 1, maybe 2 years. Each turnover, not only are you going to lose on the cost for the turnover, the leasing fees, and the vacancy, that can add up to 3 or more months very quickly.
And one thing, Conrad, before you go to the next page that I failed to mention, but getting people to sign an initial lease term longer than 12 months will obviously help out on vacancy in the long run. One of the things that I've utilized over the course of the last few years is offering a special 16 to 18 month lease special to try to lock them in for that extended lease term to cut down on that vacancy cost. So that's something that you want to be mindful of when you are putting your property on the market.
And we're quickly entering into the spring, and people are already coming out of hibernation and pounding the
Yeah.
pavement more than they have over the last few weeks or months. So
Yep.
the markets can be seasonal, and you have to be mindful of that and try to time it appropriately. So the key takeaways for all landlords is to start early. Be mindful. Start having these conversations and start your planning 120 days in advance. And of course, you can start eliminating the variables as you have the answers, but it's better to know than to not. And then when the day comes to release the property, know what you're going to get done, how quickly you can have it done, and then start with the showing sooner than later to help with the faster leasing. Have a set criteria for screening and seeking those stable tenants. That way you can reduce those future vacancies and maximize your income. And then, of course, don't try to get an extra $50 a month if it's going to take 2 months to get it. It just doesn't work out. Math is math, and you want to make sure that you're able to get the maximum over the period, not necessarily on a monthly basis. Right. So with that said, I appreciate everybody joining us, and I'm going to share out my meeting link in case anybody would like to have a consultation about what it would look like for us to help manage your property so that you can reclaim some of your personal time and offload some of these responsibilities that can go into this process.